think in previous episodes of this series, I've made it clear that I wasn't a normal person in high school. And to be honest, I'm not one now. But back then, I was even weirder. I think this story just about proves it. In the mid to late 90s, I was between 15 and 19. My parents would go on these trips. Sometimes they'd go to Paris, sometimes they'd go look at colleges with my sister. But what was I doing? The cool kids would have used that as an excuse to throw a big party. The not so cool kids would have invited their friends over to play video games for days. Me? Sometimes I'd invite my friends over for D&D, but if they weren't up to it, which was most of the time, I'd be fine. I'd go and, well, I'd just go. Which is strange because I didn't and still don't drive. I knew most of the county's bus routes, certainly all the ones near me, plus a few from all over the place because I had friends in weird places. In those days, you could get a daily bus pass for $2.50, and if you really had money to burn, you could get a weekly pass for $7.50. If my folks' trips were during the school year, I would do all my homework Friday night. If they were in the summer, it didn't really matter. I would go to the bus stop and get my unlimited ride card. I would just go somewhere. I wouldn't have any set destination in mind. I'd just hop on. I'd start on routes I knew, like the one behind my house, and I'd just pick buses at random to see where I would end up. Most of the time, the bus started, and I would recognize where it was going and have an idea where I would end up. I'd end up seeing nothing interesting or important. Other times, though, things would get really hinky really fast. When I went on these sojourns, I often wound up in places I think that, had I been anything other than a dumb teenager, I really wouldn't have wanted to be. Downtown urban areas that looked like 3 blocks of abandoned drug labs and medical supply stores. Funny how those always seem to go together. Or the time I found the place that sold sex toys, built over the remains of a Lionel Kitty city. One time it was the dead of summer. My folks had gone to Florida for about 2 weeks. No, not the good part of Florida, just some beach town near where my sister was planning to go to college in a few weeks. I hate beaches, so I didn't want to go with them. Plus, this was one of those summers where I had a part-time job. Only they wound up only needing me during the morning shift, Monday through Wednesday. This meant by 2 in the afternoon I was free. My folks gave me $200 to feed myself and keep myself entertained. And this is me we're talking about. When I'm eating on someone else's dime, I go fancy. Big chain restaurants, dine-in service, not the kinds of places where you have to wear a suit and tie, but they'll at least call you sir when you sit down. But when I'm eating on my own dime, I am cheap as f. I bought a weekly bus pass before my folks left. I stacked cold cuts in the fridge. I had bread in the cabinets. I had lunch for the entire 2 weeks. I had a freezer full of pizzas. So I was good. But I didn't tell them that. On the rare occasions where I wasn't going to a friend's house for supper, I'd bike a mile to Taco Bell for dinner. In those days, you'd get a full meal for $3. I think that's why my friends didn't want to do anything with me on the weekend. We've been doing stuff every afternoon for a week, and I can be a bit of a handful. On the other hand, I can be pretty dangerous when left to my own devices. This time I wound up in the middle of nowhere. It was one of those cases where I kinda knew where I was going. There was still a 1.5 mile walk from the bus stop to my final destination. The area itself was terminally uninteresting. 30 feet from the bus stop was an old, rickety, abandoned cabin with an old, wobbly little church with an even wobblier chapel on top. It gave me a real Manos the Heads of Fate vibe. The only thing this no-horse town had going for it was an old movie theater. It wasn't a first-run theater with the newest hits. It wasn't even a lame $1.99 second-run theater. It was a revival house. I'm almost certain they didn't get their films legally. I mean, if it were a studio-sanctioned screening, they wouldn't have been able to make money charging $5 for a double or even triple feature. If you walked into town, you'd pass a place called Hobby Games, Books, and Comics. No fancy name, just a sign that described what they sold. I thought I had been to every, and I mean every comic book store in the Washington, D.C. area. But this place was new to me. I could see the movie theater from there, and I had about an hour and a half before my movie started. So I went in. As soon as I did, I realized why I had never heard of them. They didn't have a new releases section. This place had gotten into a dispute with the major distributors and hadn't gotten a new comic book or role-playing game in almost 3 years. They would have taken comics out of their name if it weren't for the fact that they had dozens of cheap back-issue boxes that took up half the store. The place was, in essence, a geek's version of an antique shop. I had been frugal so far, but I had a week until my folks got home. I still had $180 left. Of course, I walked out with $160. But on the other hand, I had a shit ton of comics to keep me occupied for days. Weeks if my work schedule got crazy. I got one long box. If I had known this place was there, I would have tried to convince my friend to come with his folks' minivan and gotten two. But no, my friends were at the theater seeing Con Air again. Me, I've always been a film historian. I was going to see a favorite of mine that is amazing to see on the big screen if you ever get the chance. King Kong. But it was part of a triple feature along with Earth vs. the Spider and Young Gary, Monster from the Deep. Okay, here's where things go into creepypasta territory. A few weeks later, in early September, I tried to find this place again. I thought my friend and I could see a weird classic double feature for his late birthday treat. Checking online for movie times, yeah, you could do that in 1997, but you couldn't buy tickets. Their webpage said, "We're sorry, the theater is closed for repairs." And I believed it. I mean, when I had been there, the seats were kind of wobbly. They were the typical old school movie theater padded seats, only they wouldn't all spring back when you got up. The bathrooms were leaky, and the whole building reeked of stale popcorn. I thought if we couldn't go to the movies, we could at least get a lot of cheap comics and all that Star Trek stuff I had to leave behind last time I was there. And this time I wouldn't have to take the bus, so what would ordinarily be an 80-minute trip would take less than half an hour. The second half of August had been rainier than usual. There had been a lot of storms. 2 of them were the kind that knocked out power for several hours. North of where I live, they were worse. Much worse. When we got to where the bus had dropped me off, the rickety old shack of a house was gone. In its place was, I want to say, a man-made lake, but who would go to the trouble of making one and then leave lots of debris floating in it? And why in the fucking hell would they have the cross from the top of the chapel breaking the surface of the water? This wasn't a lake. This was a remnant of the storm. A lot of places in the town were gone. A farm had washed away. The movie theater, it was mostly there, but well, let's just say unless you're an Atlantean or a Lemurian, you wouldn't have been seeing movies anytime soon. It reminded me of that old poem we'd read in AP English class right before summer break.
My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing besides remains. Round the decay of the colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lonely and level sands stretch far away.
I asked one of the few remaining locals what happened. He said the movie theater should be thankful for the flooding. After all, it got struck by lightning. All the first responders were out in full force. If it hadn't been for the wind and rain, the whole place would have burned to the ground. Pretty much the only place left standing was the fucking comic book store. But they were closed because without a town to support it, there was no sense in keeping it open. But that's not the weirdest part. I've tried to find this town several times since then. I can find it on maps printed prior to 1997. It's there if you're willing to spend hours looking for it with a microscope set to maximum power. Any time after that, nothing. It's like the two counties that had laid claim to it erased all traces of its existence. If you look up its name, the one and only time you'll find reference to it is in early July 1863 when Major General Abner Doubleday got off his horse to take a piss on his way back to Washington from the Battle of Gettysburg. It is enough to make me doubt I'd ever been there. If it weren't for the fact that I still have my copy of Batman Digital Justice somewhere in a storage area, I wouldn't believe it. Part of me still doesn't. But part of me, well, it's been more than 25 years, but I still want to go see if they have their copy of Justice League International Volume 1, Number 10, because I need a new copy of that. If you liked this video, please hit like and subscribe. To help this channel really grow, visit patreon.com/parodyerrorfilms and become a patron today.